Disney's 2025 live-action version of Snow White is a generic girl boss princess movie where the princess just happens to be named Snow White, there are 7 dwarves, and the princess eats an apple. Welcome back to 3-Act Film Review. Today we'll be breaking down the live-action version of Disney's Snow White. So I went into this film with very low expectations. The press and the backlash against this movie might have left a bit of a predetermined judgment of this film. Despite that, I tried to go into this film pretending like I didn't know any of that and looking at it as a fractured fairy tale or something that was not related to the 1937 animated version of Snow White. Even with trying to look at the film through that lens, this film was still a mess. Story-wise, this film felt like 2 films squished together. Visually, it looked like the film was in perpetual golden hour. The CGI dwarves reminded me of watching the Polar Express, and the cinematography felt amateurish at best. The costumes I was split on. I really liked the Evil Queen's costuming, and every time she was on screen, she had another piece of jewelry or something else shiny, and you'd notice her crown sparkling a little more, or a new detail in her costume would show up. It really showed who the character was through the costume itself. Snow White's costume I went in not a big fan of, but as I was able to see some of the details of the dress, it started to grow on me. I'm still not a fan of the bright yellow and the muted light blue, but there was still some attention put into the design of that dress that I can appreciate. However, the bandits' costuming was not that great. They looked like they had just found random pieces of clothing in a closet and tried to make them fit for a fairy tale setting. And then there was Jonathan, with his olive green hoodie, that is shirt and hoodie combined for those that don't know, that left his costume feeling too modern-y, yet not something anyone would want to wear today. Cast-wise, Gal Gadot, as much as I love her in Wonder Woman, is not that great of an actress, and an even worse singer. Not that the song they wrote for her was any good either, but she has said she had fun doing the film, so I'll give her props for that. Rachel Zegler, on the other hand, can sing, and I actually enjoyed listening to her sing, but she also struggled on the acting part of this film. Her character was constantly going back and forth between smug, smirking Rachel Zegler to sweet and kind and gentle Snow White, and that made any attempts at being the sweet, kind Snow White feel ingenuine and forced. This was a film that fell victim to what I call creativity by committee. This film had multiple writers. I think last I heard there were like 7 writers, and it went through multiple reshoots. Disney really needed to stick with one thing and go with it, instead of having to put so many people and try to do their own thing, while also trying to appease their audience. Would the film have been any better if they had stuck with one thing instead of trying to combine so many other things? I don't know. But it probably would have been less of a half-cobbled together multi-story movie that didn't make sense half of the time. I will give this to the movie. I was pleasantly surprised with a few scenes, which I won't explain here without giving away any spoilers. The movie also fixed one issue that I had with the original animated version. The ending of the animated version was the evil queen falling off a cliff and dying, and the prince waking Snow White and taking her to his kingdom. So Snow White's kingdom just lost their queen, and their princess just abandoned them. Who was left to rule the kingdom? Was there someone else in line? Will a revolution happen and their form of government change? Will there be a war trying to figure out who will be in charge? Now that would be a movie I'd like to see. But this live-action version actually modified the story so that loose end was not there, which I appreciated. Here's my score for the movie. For story, it got 3 out of 10. The 3-act structure, 6 out of 10. Craft was 3 out of 10, and enjoyment was 4 out of 10. So overall, this got a 4 out of 10. Now let me explain why all of those things. I'm going to start with story. There were many issues with this story. Like I've already said, this movie had 7 writers, went through multiple reshoots. It felt like 2 movies squished together. It was like there was the original Snow White story, and then there was this Kingdom Revolution story that they tried to fit together, and they weren't working together at all. That was a big issue I had with the story. Another big issue that I have with the story is there were just a couple things. When you look at the original 1937 Snow White, there's a part where she's really trying to get the affection of Grumpy. She's trying to break through his scowling and his hard shell. And at some point in the movie, because of her kindness and her gentleness, she's able to break through and connect with him. And so then when she eats the apple and is basically dead, all the dwarves are surrounded, and there's a very specific shot that's just focused on Grumpy crying because Snow White had such a big impact on him. Now, in this version of Snow White, they've changed it so Snow White has that connection with Dopey. So Dopey has this thing where he is clumsy and he makes mistakes like he does in the original. Another side note here. In the original, Dopey's okay with the fact that he's a little clumsy and silly. And that's part of his character. In this version, he's not okay with that. And so when he trips or he breaks something or does something silly, he becomes ashamed of it instead of embracing it, which I felt like kind of destroyed Dopey's character. Anyway, Snow White tries to talk with him, and she tells him it's okay to make mistakes sometimes. One day you'll have the courage to speak and all of these things. So she's growing this connection with Dopey instead of with Grumpy. But then towards the end of the movie, after she's eaten the apple, we still get that very specific shot of Grumpy crying. And so that shot then felt really out of place because there wasn't that storyline of Snow White trying to make a connection with Grumpy. Instead, she was making a connection with Dopey. So that was something in the story that I really did not like. I didn't mind that she was encouraging him to talk. I kind of liked that at the end Dopey did learn to talk and have more courage. But I feel like that could have also been done in a way where it didn't destroy his original character, where he's okay with being a little silly and a little dopey. That's why his name is Dopey. Something else about the story that I didn't particularly like, or at least didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So the evil queen comes, her father goes off to war, and then Snow White becomes a servant in her own house. So she's basically just locked inside the castle the whole time, just like doing chores or whatever. But at the end of the movie, when she walks into town to try and like start this revolution with all the people in the kingdom, which by the way was a really, really small kingdom. I don't know how the kingdom was that small. It was like one block of houses. It was like 20 people in that whole village. Anyway, she walks in and she's standing there with her red cape. She's looking all stoic. And the people look at her, they like recognize her, and then they like start singing and walking behind her. But like, it's probably been years since they've seen her. And it's like, how did they recognize her? Why are they just deciding to rise up now that she's walked into the kingdom also? Like, she didn't even say anything to them. Like, she just walked in and they're like, we're going to follow you. That didn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of the story. Some things that I did like about the story, I do really appreciate that they did actually add a love story in. I kind of liked that he wasn't a prince and that the relationship seemed to kind of grow a little more naturally than it seems to in the animated version. Although I do have I wouldn't call it a theory, because there's that book series, that Disney book series about the villains and like their origin stories. And in the one about the evil queen, Snow White and the prince had met before. And so it wasn't like this stranger was stalking her, following her, the way that Rachel Zegler had claimed in the press briefings. That book, it shows that their relationship started growing over time. And the reason that Snow White like runs and hides from him is because she can't be seen with him. If the queen sees them together, then like she'll get mad and jealous and stuff like that. And so that is the version that I go with, is that they have met before. The 1937 version just kind of jumps in the middle of their relationship starting to grow. So that's how I imagine the animated one. But I do like that for this live action one, we were able to see the beginning of this relationship growing and them being together. They actually were kind of cute together, although the Princess Problem song, very musical theater. There were a lot of very musical theater-y songs in this. It was kind of a weird mix of things in this movie. Anyway, so I liked that. This movie, structure-wise, was a massive mess. So when I'm tracking 3-act structure, I'm not just tracking where the acts land, but I'm tracking the characters' decisions and why they make their decisions and what their goals are and how they change over the course of the movie. And so Snow White starts at the beginning of the movie. She's the scullery maid. She finds out that the people in her kingdom are starving, and so she decides, I want to do something to change that, right? She has had this idea in her head since her father was alive that she wants to become a leader like he was, become a kind of benevolent ruler the same way that he was. And so she is channeling that want into, I want to help the people because they're starving. That's where we get her call to action, is she sees Jonathan come in and stealing potatoes, and that clues her in. And so she goes to the queen and says, let's make the kingdom apple pie. That's what we did when I was younger. So let's make them some pies. And so that ultimately, that becomes her driving want, is let's make them apple pies. And the reason I'm saying that's her want is because that's going to become important in a minute, instead of saying that her want is to be like her father. Because at that moment, her want is to make apple pies for the kingdom. And of course, the queen is like, no, they don't need apple pies. There's the guards catch Jonathan with potatoes. Snow White is able to let him go and show a little kindness to him and everything. Then we get her I Want song, Waiting on a Wish. I really like the song, but in terms of Snow White's character development and the structure of this movie, it's a little problematic. Because in the first verse, she starts singing about how she wants to be a leader like her father was. She wants to be the leader that bakes the apple pies for her kingdom and is kind, and they all flourish together. They were when she was a child. And then the second verse, she sings about how the kingdom is trapped by this evil presence, by the evil queen, and she wants to leave the kingdom. She wants to leave the walls behind her and get out. And so now we have two conflicting wants. She wants to lead the kingdom as her father once did, and she wants to leave the kingdom. And so I'm like, which is it, Snow White? Do you want to be a leader and, be there to help your people, or are you going to abandon them? Like, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting there. Then we get to the end of the song, and she starts singing about how she wants to be brave and be the one that saves herself and doesn't need somebody to be saved. So now we have 3 wants in this one song. And so I'm like, which is it? What do you want, girl? I have no idea, because you've spouted out 3 totally different things. Do you want to lead and save yourself? Do you want to leave the castle? Which is it? You've already tried speaking up to the queen, so I don't know why you're singing about that again, about trying to speak your mind. You've already spoken your mind to the queen, and she dismissed you. What are you going to do about that? And she doesn't really do anything about that until the end of the movie. So at this point, it's like, well, are we going to be leader? Are we making apple pies? Are we abandoning the kingdom? Which is it? So then the evil queen goes to the mirror and is like, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest on the wall? And the mirror's like, it's Snow White. And the evil queen's like, rude. I don't want that. And so she's like, okay, well, Snow White really wanted to make apple pies. Let's send her out into the orchard to pick apples, and then I'll send the huntsman with her to kill her because I want her gone. So that's why baking the apple pies want is important, because that's kind of the decision that leads us into the second act. So because she confronted the queen and said, I want to make apple pies, so the queen was like, okay, you can make your apple pies, go pick apples. And she sends the huntsman out. And so she's picking her apples, and the huntsman comes up behind her with the knife, and he can't do it. And she's like all terrified, but she also has this weird look on her face because Rachel Zegler has some very weird expressions in this movie. But she's standing there looking all terrified, and the huntsman's like, I can't do it. I can't kill you. The queen wants me to kill you. And then the huntsman is like, but I know a secret about your father. And it's like all he tells her is like, the queen's hiding something about your father. And then he tells her to run, and so she runs into the forest and gets all scared and finds the animals. Then at that point, her want has changed. So she's not normally in a movie, when you're moving from act 1 to act 2, your main character needs to move from act 1 into act 2 pursuing their want, and the whole movie needs to be them pursuing their want because they have a wrong idea of what their want is and how to get it, and they keep failing at getting it. Snow White in this movie keeps changing her want. So now that we've moved into Act 2, she no longer wants to be a leader. She no longer wants to make apple pies. She's now left the kingdom, so I guess she got that wish. But now she's found out that the queen has been hiding some secret about her father. And so she assumes that means that her father is alive. So now she wants to go find her father. And so I'm like, which is it, girl? Do you want to lead like your father? Or are you going to go find your father so he can take care of it for you? Like, those are two very different things. And then she comes across the 7 dwarves. That all plays out like it does in the movie pretty much. And then she's like, okay, well, now I'm leaving. I'm going to find my father. And the dwarves are like, okay, be safe. And so she goes out into the woods and she finds the bandits. And then they're like the guards there and they're trying to kill Snow White because the queen finds out that Snow White's still alive. So she's with Jonathan. They like have this fight and with the royal guards and they manage to get away. But Jonathan gets shot. And so Snow White takes the bandits back to the dwarves' cottage because she assumes that because Doc's name is Doc, that he's a doctor, even though he's not. And so then works on Jonathan anyway and gets the arrow out. And then there's this nice moment with Snow White and Jonathan. They're like falling in love. It was kind of cute. The song was actually kind of good in that part. So she's staying with the dwarves for a little bit. Jonathan is like, I'm going to go see if I can find your father for you. And she's like, okay. And then he gets caught by the evil queen. And the evil queen is like, all right, well, now I got to do this all by myself because obviously all these other people can't kill her. So I'm going to make this poison apple. Makes the poison apple, takes it. Evil queen goes to the cottage. And Snow White finds out that Jonathan's been captured. And so now her want is to go rescue Jonathan. So she's changed her want again. She's like, I gotta go find Jonathan. And the evil queen's like, well, you should take this apple in case you get hungry on the road. And she's like, okay. And then the evil queen convinces her to eat it there. And then is like, psych, I am the one that killed your father. And so it turned out like her father, like this big secret was that the queen killed her father, which we were all assuming from the beginning anyway. So it like didn't even need to be a thing. Jonathan manages to escape, comes and wakes Snow White up. And then Snow White's like, okay, now I want to be a leader again and save my kingdom from the evil queen. And so now we're like kind of back to her original want, but we've changed wants so many times to get there, which is also problematic because when moving from Act 2 to Act 3, your main character realizes what the real problem they've been trying to face is and what the real solution to that problem is, and that their pursuit of their want, the way they've been pursuing it is they've like been making all these mistakes. And so now they need to be pursuing this need, and it's usually something internal. Snow White, she's changed her want so many times that she's gotten back to her original want and is like, okay, I'm going to pursue my original want, which then pans out great for her. She goes and she confronts the queen with grace and kindness and doesn't like fight the queen. She has like this superpower where she can remember people's names, which kind of shows up periodically through the movie. And that's kind of how she saves the day, is that she remembers what people's names were. And so that was a little odd, but she never really has any growth on what it really means to be kind and to be fair and brave and true like her father taught her. She's just kind of assuming that she's already like that the whole movie. And so we don't ever see any character arc or growth from her. So her character becomes very stagnant. She ends up being able to defeat the queen that way anyway. And then the queen like runs in the castle and breaks the mirror. And then because she like messed with the mirror's magic, she like gets sucked in the mirror, and Snow is just like standing there like, what's happening? And then they all have a party at the end. Tracking that, like there were very clear separations of the 3 acts of like moving into the forest and then going back into the kingdom. But Snow White's character development was not there, which is super important for 3-act film structure. I gave it a 6 out of 10 because it did have very clear act breaks and it was following a story arc, but it didn't really get higher than that because Snow White's arc was so flat and she didn't learn anything except maybe that it's okay to fall in love. But then that was like just the middle of the movie, and then they like kind of brushed it aside after that. For the craft of this movie, again, the cinematography was just so basic. Like, there were these straight-on shots that looked so awkward, and reaction shots that didn't need to be there, and these kind of weird angles. The lighting on the set, again, it looked like it was in perpetual golden hour. There just seemed to be kind of a yellow haze over everything. Nothing was super vibrant. The acting was mid at best throughout the whole thing. The dwarves, again, looked like they were straight from the Polar Express. The songs, there was like one song in the whole thing that was good. Good Things Grow was fine. Something to Do With You I liked. Like, that was the romance song. And Waiting on a Wish, I thought that was a good song. But again, get your priorities straight, girl. Like, what are you doing? I felt like they ruined Hi Ho, though. Hi Ho had this whole section where the dwarves are just listing off their names like we don't already know who they are. And then there was like the scene right after where they meet Snow White and they say all their names again. And so I just felt like that was completely unnecessary in Hi Ho. Just leave that song as it is. Costuming, the Snow White costume kind of grew on me. There were these nice kind of flower details that I started noticing, which were nice. But the character with the best costuming, honestly, was the Evil Queen. She had the best costumes. For the sets, there were many spots where you could tell that it was shot on a green screen and on a sound stage, and so those didn't look very good. But I really liked the cottage, the Seven Dwarfs cottage. It was very detailed. It was very reminiscent of the one in the original movie. But yeah, the other sets, they were fine. The forest, you could tell it was a set. The village was really small. The castle was fine. Like, the castle was a good set. But yeah, sets weren't that great. So yeah, the craft on this movie, it just was very messy and looked like it shouldn't have taken as long as it did to make that movie, except I know that they went through so many reshoots, and that is probably the problem, is that they went through so many reshoots. And then my enjoyment of this movie, 4 out of 10. I low-key was kind of hoping that this movie was gonna at least be a 5. It stayed a 4. This movie had so much potential to be amazing. It had the potential to be something like Cinderella was. Like, my opinion is Cinderella, that is like the best live action movie that Disney has made of these live action remakes. This movie could have been so beautiful had they just stuck to the original fairy tale and tried to keep it timeless and classic like the animated one was, instead of trying to mess with things. I honestly think that the whole scenario of the princess trying to rescue her kingdom and start a rebellion against the evil queen, I don't think that's a terrible story, but I think that should have been its own movie. That should have been a completely separate movie, not attached to Snow White whatsoever. Create a new princess for it. That would have been great, and then keep Snow White as Snow White. But because they were trying to push those two stories together, it just did not work whatsoever. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on Snow White. I'd love to know what your guys' thoughts were on this movie in the comments. I'm sure we have a lot of the same opinions on what happened with this movie. It really was just a hot mess, and Disney needed to just stick with one plan and just go with it. Anyway, so leave your thoughts about this movie down in the comments. I look forward to seeing what you guys thought about the movie as well.